Today's daf is daf Chav Daled, and we'll start with the Mishnah on the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis. And this Mishnah is going to talk about establishing a person as a Kohen through Edus. And the question is, we know that a person is not Neman al Atmo as a single aid. He cannot be trustworthy to establish that that he's a Kohen. But if, let's say, he comes with a buddy and he's made not only al Atzmo but also on his buddy that we're both Kohanim, that's the subject of the Mishnah. Shchein Shnei Anoshim, two men, Zeh Omer Kohen Ani, V'Zeh Omer Kohen Ani, ein of them on him. So again, Eid Echad cannot be made on himself that he's a Kohen. However, Bizman Shein Me'idim Zal Zeh, if Ruvain is testifying not only on himself, but also on Shimon and vice versa, Arei Elun Emon. And you might say that's obvious because now we have ample evidence and testimony for each one to establish him as a Kohen. But the Chiddush is that Ein Chosheshin Shema Hiskimu Beneim. We don't, we're not suspicious of like a cartel. You know, I'll do for you and you do for me. We need two witnesses to establish that a person is a Kohen. Well, in this last case that we had, we only really have one witness for each Kohen, and that's not sufficient. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we will not allow this person to, for example, eat truma. And if he's a zar, a non-Kohen, then achilus truma is misa b'dei shamayim. It's a very severe violation. So for that, we need two witnesses, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Omer Rabbi Lazar, Emosai. When do I accept Rabbi Yehuda that one witness is not enough to establish kahuna? That's only b'makom sheyesh orerin. Orerin means there's some doubt as to the status of this person. For example, there's a rumor circulating that this guy is not a Kohen or he's a Kohen possible. Avol b'makom sheyesh orerin. Here, says Rabbi Lazar, I'm going to agree with the Chachamim that one witness is sufficient. Because the person has a Cheskas Kohen, no one is questioning his roots, and therefore one aid is sufficient. So it seems that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is repeating what we just said, that one aid is sufficient, either according to the Tanakama or according to Rabbi Lazar in the case where there's no Orerin. What did Rabbi Shimon Gamliel add to the Mishnah? That's going to be the Sugyas HaGemara. Now, at this point, the Gemara gives an overview of this parak in Masechet Ksubos from the perspective of Hapesh Asa Hapesh Hita. And going through all the various cases and dinim that have been codified by the Mishnayos in this parak, what does each Mishnah add to the other Mishnah, to the previous Mishnah? Kol hani lama litzrichi. And now we're going to go through each Mishnah first. The first Mishnah. The Itana, I come to you and I say, this field belonged to your father. You had no clue. And then I say, but I bought it from your father. And the Mishnah is machadish that Moder Rabbi Yeshua, even though Rabbi Yeshua in general does not rely on migu, but he concedes that we give a person credibility based on Hapesh Asa Hapesh Hitir. And we would think that the reason for that, why is Rabbi Yeshua Moder in this case, is Mishum De'ika Drora D'Mamona. Now, Drora D'Mamona, first of all, means that we're not dealing with Isser V'Heter like Siege, or the issue of a Shavuya, which has to do with her status maybe as a Zona vis-a-vis Kahuna. We're dealing with Mama. But the phrase Drora D'Mamona goes even a step further, because Drora D'Mamona means that I already have in Bezdin a shaykhus to this mama. if I claim that I bought this field from your father and you don't deny it, that already gives me a drara de mamon. The very fact that you don't know, you didn't get any documents or legacy from your father that this karka belonged to him, and therefore the Yorish inherits. So the drara de mamona here can be understood in two ways. On the one hand, drara de mamona means that the claimant, the machzik, has a drara de mamona because the defendant, or no, actually we call him the plaintiff, right? He's not claiming anything. He doesn't know that this field belongs. On the other hand, Dafka, the plaintiff, has a drara de mamona because once I admit that this field belonged to your father, then you already have a claim to the field. But since your claim to the field is based on my admission, I'm the one who says that this sada belonged to your father. Therefore, I'm believed with the peshasa or peshahit. Aval edim. Now we get to the case of the Mishnah Daf Yud Ches, where witnesses are called upon to verify their signatures, and they say, "Anusim ayinu, tanim ayinu, p'tuliedas ayinu." We were disqualified when we signed the shtar. In that case, leka drara de mamona, the edim are not claiming any moment for themselves. They're testifying in a court case between the malva and the lover, and in this case, they are siding with the lover to disqualify the shtar. But they have no tzad mama, and therefore that doesn't give them a solid nemonus of peshas or peshiter malo. So therefore, the Mishnah had to add this case of Edim to teach me that even in the absence of drara de mamona, there still is a credibility that's based on peshas or peshiter. And what is the nemonus of peshas or peshiter? It is that ksav yadenu zeh, and then they say, well, anusim ayinu. You know what? Maybe after they said ksav yadenu zeh, and they realized that now the malva is going to collect with the shtar, maybe they had a change of heart, and they quickly decided, hey, we got to get rid of the shtar, otherwise the malva is going to collect illegally from the shtar. So they came up and drummed up this argument of anusim ayinu, and the chiddush of the Mishnah is no, that the power of peshasa peshita is so great that they are believed, and we assume that what they started with the peshasa, and they said ksav yadenu, that they meant from the get-go, it was their intention to complete with a peshahitir by saying anusim hayim. The itana edim, if the Mishnah would only have the case of peshasa peshahitir in the case of edim, mishum dili alma, aval iul nafshe ema lo. In the case of the Edim, they can be seen as objective. They're third party. They're not any of the two parties that are involved in a litigation over money. And therefore, it makes sense to say that if they added on Nutzimayinu, then it's not that they changed their mind. And that would be very embarrassing. It would be bizarre for them to go back and change their edus. It must be that they're telling you honestly that anusim hayin. But in the case of Sada Zushal Avicha, so maybe midway it occurred to him, wait a second, if I'm going to admit that this field belonged to his father, I'm going to lose the field. I better immediately come up with some sort of an argument that would convince Bezdin that it's my field. And therefore I added the word l'tachtia mimenu as a second thought. And therefore I don't know if in such a case I should be believed. Now I wrote myself a note here on the side that it seems that Peshas Peshehitir has one definite goal or agenda, and that is to create one Haggadah that's indivisible. you could have said, if not for our Mishnayos here, that it's Peshas period, and that was one Haggadah. And now he comes up with the new Haggadah to be Matir. Well, it's too late. You've already generated an Isur. You're not believed to be Matir. Kamash Malon, that no, this was all one statement, indivisible. You didn't get a chance to hear his whole statement. You cannot cut him off in the middle and terminate the first Eidos, creating a first Eidos as an entity. No, you have to listen to the whole story. What comes out of the whole story? Not Isur, but Heter. What comes out of the whole story? That the Tovea has rights to the field, or that the Malv has rights to the Shtar. The Iyashmin and Hani Tarti, if we had both the case of Sadazu Shalavicha and Xavier Denus and Shtaras Mishum de Momona, that's only Didi Mominus. Aval Beishis Ish, a woman who comes along, she has a Cheskes Pnuya, and she says, I was married, but I was divorced, is Beishis Ishi Suro. Now we're talking not about a woman, we're talking about Isur, Emalo. We're not going to give her the Demonis to say that she was divorced, to be matir herself, and remove an Isur Eishis Ish. Kamash Malon, the Mishnah is Machadish us that there's a Pesha Pesha here, even as far as Isurim are concerned. But then the Gemara asks, well, wait a minute, the last case we had was Nishbesi Utorani. She's believed to say that although I was captured, I was not raped. And lovely, why do I need that for? After all, we've already established Pesha Pesha in the case of an H's each. It would seem with the Kal Vachomer that in the case of the Isur Zona, Lakohen, she would certainly have an amonis of Peshasa Peshi. So we're now on the top of Daf Chavdal. Now the Gemara says the following: the case of Nishbesi Torali is really not necessary in and of itself. What justifies it, it's a segue. It's an introduction to the next part of the Mishnah, and that is the Mishnah. If a woman is known to be a shvuya and she claims that she was tahora, then we won't allow her to get married. But if she already got married, then lo teitze. And that's a chiddush. Why? Because now Aiden came and testified that she was a shvuya. She no longer has a pesachita. But the answer is, since Bezdin gave her a heter to get married at the point where she had a pesachita prior to the arrival of the Adim, therefore lo teitze me'atera harishon, and therefore we're not going to take her out of the marriage that she married. So the Gemara now goes back to a machlokas hamoraim, which we tried to understand yesterday, and I found it a little bit complicated. And that was on Daf Chav Gimel and Aleph. It says, "Mishenises bo Edim." If the Edim came after she got married, lo teitze. And the question of the Amoraim was, does that din apply even to an Eishes Ish Minat Torah? Shvuya is only an Isur D'Rabbanan, because a woman has a Cheskes Tara and a Heter L'Kohenim. We don't know that she's a Zona until she's absolutely proven to be a Zona, but a Shvuya was a Takanas Chachamim. So perhaps we can accept a Pesha Asa Pesha Hitir in a case where she got married before the Adam came in and she lost her Pesha Asa Pesha Hitir and Lo Teitze, but that's only in a case of a shvuya that's the Rabbana, but not in a case of an Eishes Ish Doraisa. And that's one opinion in the Gemara. The other opinion in the Gemara, back on Daf Chav Daled, is that even in the case of Eishes Ish, which is Doraisa, we still will apply the principle of Imises Lotates. The Gemara says the following: This is Rabba Bar Ovin, who learned the din on the Sefer when she says Nishbesi Utahorani. In that case, because Shvuya is only D'Rabbanan, and they gave her a heter to get married, lo teitze. but not in the case of Eshesich. That's Doraisa. We will not apply this principle of Kevan Shehiga, which was removed. I'm sorry, Eshasa, which was removed later when the Adam came in, and say him this slow take. So we can't do that in the case of a Doraisa like Eshesich. So now everything fits into place, and the Chiddush here of the Mishnah is the Sefer of Mishanises Bo Edim Harezu Lo Tete, because she originally had the license to get married based on a Peshasa Peshahitir, and that applies even in the case of an Eishes. Ella Lamanda Basilea Resha. Now we have Rav Ochi who disagrees with Rabbi Bar Ovin, and he says that this din is only on the Resha in the case of Eishes Isha Yisiv and Iskarashti. Is Michael Mema. We already have this chiddush that even though we're dealing with a case of Niskarashti, and the Adam came later on to testify that she was an Eishes. So what is the chiddush now in the Sefer? And the Gemara answers, Mishum the Kaboyle Misnei Shtei Nashim Shen Nishbu. We have the following Mishnah that talks about two women that were both captivated, and each one testifies on the other one, Tahora, that she was not raped, and both of them will be believed, and we're not afraid of Gomlin, like we said before, that I'll do for you, you do for me. They're telling the truth. And therefore the Tana opens up with an introduction by saying, Nishpesi Tahorani Nemenes. That itself is not a chiddush, because we know it works even in HSH. But in order to follow through with the din, that if they're me'ido zu al zu, even though we might suspect that they're working in cartel, they're working in cahoots with each other, no, we believe. The Gemara says, "Ushtei nashim shenishbu lamali." What's the chiddush of that? Later on Daf Chav Zayin, we're going to learn that even an eved or a shivcha are believed to testify in a shvuya that she's tahora, that she was not raped. How much more so here, when one chavrita is testifying on the other? Maybe they're working in cahoots. No, we're not choshish legomlin. Okay, so now we have the case of the Kohen. We both come into Bezdin, and we both testify about ourselves and about our colleague, one to the other, that we are Kohen. So Lomali. I mean, in the first case of Shnei Anoshim, right, we had to say a Reisha and a Sefer. In the Reisha, each one is testifying on himself, and he's not believed. But so the Gemara asks Pshita, and the answer is that you're right. If this Kohen says Hani Kohen and this Kohen says Hani Kohen, that's Pshita. But Mishum the Kaboy Misnei, in the Sefer, again, it's a segue to the Sefer. Plukta de Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan are of the opinion that if each one of these individuals is made on his friend, that his friend is a Kohen, we believe him, and we can establish his status as a Kohen. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He holds we're not going to believe them because they're working in cahoots. We learned to the Brisa, Ni Kohen v'chaveri Kohen. Nemon lachilu b'truma v'eino nemon lasio isha. Gemara wants to differentiate and subdivide the concept of kahuna into two subcategories. There's achilas truma, and this kashrus lekal ulekahuna. And the Brisa quotes the Tanakama, we'll soon see the Rabbi Yehuda descends, to differentiate between these two dinim, achilas truma and kashrus linisuin. In the case of achilas truma, we're going to rely on the testimony of one aide. And we're not going to be afraid of Gomlin, that maybe they're working in cahoots when this one says I'm a Kohen and he's a Kohen, and the other one says the same thing. And we could be making an Achilas Truma. But as far as Yuchsin is concerned, to assume that there's no psul, either psulei kol like mamzerus or psulei kahuna, for that we can't rely on 1/8. Now, I think that the basic distinction that this Tanakama the Brisa is making is between what we call Eid Echad Nem Bisurin and Davar Shebe'erev V'Ein Davar Shebe'erev Pochs Mishnayim. In the case of Truma, it's a question of Isa V'Heter. Is he a Zar or is he a Kohen? Is he allowed to eat Truma? He's not allowed to eat Truma. That's Isa V'Heter. And here we have a principle, Eid Echad Nem Bisurin. But in the case of Yuchsin, and you want to know whether there was some Mamzerus mixed in, that has the status of a Davar Shebe'erva and Ein Davar Shebe'erva Pochs Mishnayim. Because otherwise, at least from my perspective, we're in deep trouble over here. Because Achilas Truma is a Misa B'dei Shamayim. And you're telling me that Eid Echad is believed? And then you're going to turn around and tell me when there's a suffix, I don't know, mamzer or something else mixed into the family, we're going to be making, we're going to be machmir. How can you be machmir mamzeris, which in the worst case scenario you're violating a law, and you're going to be making a truma, which is an isur kares. So Belinetta, we'll see as the Gemara develops. Ad shiyu shlosha. We have to have 3 Kohanim, right? The 3 musketeers that came from the wild blue yonder. Shnayim me'idim al zeh, shnayim me'idim al zeh. You could have 2 witnesses out of the 3 testifying on each one, on the third. And then you could shift it around. It's like a round robin. So we always have 2 eidim on each one of these 3 individuals that came from Medina Sayyam. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af Eno Nema L'Achila B'Truma. We're going back to the case of one single aid. He has no colleagues. It's he himself. Is Eno Nema L'Achila B'Truma. This was our svara. Rabbi Yehuda is pushing the envelope. Truma is an Isur Misa B'dei Shamayim. We have to be very careful. It's like a Davar Shebe'erva, requires 2 eidim. Ad shiyu shlosha shnayim eidim al zeh shnayim eidim al zeh. The only way that you could establish his status as a Kohen to allow him to eat Truma is if we have that trio, the 3 musketeers, and we have 2 testifying on the third, and so forth and so on. That means that Rabbi Yehuda upgrades the status of Achilas Truma to a Davar Shebe'erva. You're dealing with the same Kohen and a Kohen kosher. To allow him to eat Truma, then you need 2 eidim. So the Gemara asks Lameimer to Rabbi Yehuda Chayish L'Gomlin. Is it possible that the way you're understanding Rabbi Yehuda, in a case where it's 1 aid and 1 aid, and each one testifies on the other one, we don't believe him because he's choshesh l'gomlin, that maybe they made up one with the other. It's a great deal. I'll testify on your behalf, you testify, why wash yours? Rabbanan lo chayshina l'gomlin. The Rabbanan say we're not choshesh l'gomlin. Take each aid separately, interrogate him, accept his aidus. In fact, you don't have to worry about gomlin. Where do we see halacha of chayshina l'gomlin? Is there any source for that? So now the Gemara is going to go through a very long proof to show that it seems that there's a contradiction vis-a-vis this issue of Gomlin between 2 brisos. The brisa that we said before that transmits Rabbi Yehuda as the one who's choshesh Gomlin, the Chacham not. And now we're going to learn a brisa that has it just the opposite. And it's going to be Rabbi Yehuda's not choshesh l'gomlin, the Chachamim are. And the discussion is about the issue of Teva. Now, I think this is a Mishnah, just for my own. Yeah, this not. It's a Mishnah. Chamorim. Chamorim are merchandise sellers that bring their merchandise through a very complex system of transportation until they arrive at the marketplace where they think they could find a buyer. And why they called chamorim? Because in those days, the sellers of merchandise used to transport their merchandise over the donkeys. Nichnasu le'ir. Now, what we have to know here, by way of introduction, is the difference between a ma'aretz and a chaver. A chaver is trustworthy, even if we didn't hear it explicitly from his mouth. We assume that his tvua is already mu'usar, but not in the case of an amoritz. And the entire takon of Dmai is based on the amoritz, who's not trustworthy, and we cannot assume that he was mafresh masa. So when I go to the shuk and I buy peros and fua from an amoretz, I have to consider that fua as demai, as sofek tevel, and therefore I have to go ahead and be mafresh trumas and maisros. Omar echad mehem. So we have a pair of chamorim. One says shalich chadash, v'shel chaveri yashan. Now, when I first read this, I thought he's boasting about the fact that his tfu is chadash. No. It's just the opposite. Chadash means that it's still moist and it's not ready for grinding in the mills. But yashan means it's already been cut for a month or 2 months and it's drying in the sun. It's perfectly ready for tchina b'rei chaim. Now we have another case. Now again, notice that he is admitting that his merchandise is of a lower quality. It's chadash. It's worth less on the market, but he's testifying about his friend, that his friend is holding on to Yosh. Now we have another case, exactly similar, but now in Isa Behet. Shali Eina Masukan. I have to admit that I was not mafresh trumas and maisros from my tfua, but Shel Chaveri Masukan. The tfua of my friend is already after Afrasha and it's mut. Now, if I could subtract one word from the Gemara, the next word in the Gemara would be nem. And that makes a lot of sense to me. The man is admitting that his own tfua is inferior. He's confessing that he's holding on to the chadash or to Eina Mesukan. We should certainly respect his integrity when he says about his friend that his friend is holding on to tfua, which is already Mesukan. The Hafrashas Trumas and Maisu is already implemented. Or his friends have older tfua, yavesh, and ready to go to the mill. But I can't subtract that word. It says enonem. He's not believed. This is the Tanakam. Why? Because Chayshina L'Gomer. He says, look, my friend, come with me. I'm going to downgrade my tefua and upgrade your tefua. And we're going to get to the next town over. Right? My father came from Plisa. Next town over was Germanovich. So when we get to Germanovich, then you'll say about my tefua that it's better quality, it's already Yavesh or it's Mesukan. And you'll admit about yours, etc., etc. So this is the sharp way that people did business, but swindling. And therefore, the Tanakhama says, we cannot believe you. It's exactly the opposite of what we established about Eid Echad, who comes in and testify that my friend is a Kohen. And the Chacham say, we believe him. And we're not Choshish L'Gomer. But here, we're Choshish L'Gomer. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Neman. We're not Choshish L'Gomer. So everything is upside down. We're going to apply the old principle of Mukhlef Hashita. We're going to change the girsa in the Brisa. And that's because we respect the Mishnah and its transmission is more reliable. And we're not going to change and tamper with the Mishnah. And in the Brisa, we're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda was the one who says, Neman. That when he testifies about his friend, that he's a Kohen, we could be Machil, his friend Truma, and we're not Choshish L'Gomer. The Rabbanan disagree. They hold that we need two solid, independent Eidim because we're Choshish L'Gomer. So it's Mukhlefes Hashit. I mean, this is a tremendous chumrah if you accept Rav Acha here, Rav Ado Bar, because very often you could only come up with, two friends that are Kohanim, and one is made on the other that he's a Kohen. And now you're telling me that the Chachamim were the ones who are Choshish L'Gomer. And if we paskin like the Rabbim, like the Chachamim, we can't accept this testimony. Okay, in the other case, we had a discussion about the value of the tefua, the market value. Is it yashan? Is it chadash? Okay, there, it's not so tragic if you want to say chayshina l'gomlin. So don't buy this schor until you're absolutely convinced that's yashan, that it's yashan. Send it to a lab. I don't know. But the real repercussions of this Gemara are in terms of establishing a person's status. I don't have to go that far. I'm not so desperate that I have to implement the svara of Anger and Cheetahs. We're going to go back to our original assumption from the Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda is Choshish L'Gomer and Rabbanan are not. Rabbi Yehuda says in the Mishnah L'Gabe D'mai that he's neman to testify at his friend, that his friend is Mesukan, and we're not being Choshish L'Gomer. B'D'mai hi kilu sherov ha'me'oretz mas. What is D'mai? As we said earlier, D'mai is purchased from an Amoretz, and we're afraid he wasn't Mafresh Chumas and Maisus. But Rov Amoretz are Ma'asm. So we're being Choshesh for the Miut. That's already a rabbinic Chumrah. And when it comes to a rabbinic Chumrah, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that Ruvain is neman to say that Shimon was ma'aser and his tefua is misukenes. But in all the other cases, when we exit the strict, restricted domain of D'mai, then Rabbi Yehuda is going to be Choshesh L'Gomer. Dealing with Truma, we're dealing with Yuchsin. And here, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, Chayshina Ligom. Can't trust one aid. Omar Rava, Mida Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda Kasha, Mida Rabbana, the Rabbana Lo Kasha. Rava turns to Abaye and he says, okay, you're working out very hard to reconcile the two statements of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, in the case of Tmai, he believes the testimony of one aid on his friend, that is, whereas in the case of Cohen, Rabbi Yehuda is not willing to rely on one aid. But what about the Rabbanan and the Rabbanan? There's a stira here in the Shitas Rabbanan. Because the Rabbanan, in the case of Truma, which is Doraisa, they're not Choshish L'Gomlin. They're going to rely on this guy who's testifying about his buddy, that he's a Kohen. And yet, in the case of Dmai, the Rabbanan say we're Choshish L'Gomlin, right? Eino Nema. So now we're going to have a very interesting phenomenon. It's a little bit rare. After Rava slugs up Abaye by saying, Abaye, you only went a half-baked answer because you're only reconciling Rabbi Yehuda, you haven't told me a thing about Rabbanan. Rava now himself is going to offer to supplement Abaye, and based on the principles of Abaye, to reconcile the stira in the Rabbanan. Ella. So first Rava reiterates what Abaye said. The Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha kidim shaninon. Just as Abaye answered that in the case of Tmai, they would make it, and they were not choshish l'gomlin. Drabana lo kasha. Very nice, Abaye, that you answered the question about reconciling the two statements of Rabbi Yehuda. How are you going to reconcile the statements, the positions of the Rabbana? And now the Gemara invokes, Rava quotes, Kidoma Rav Chama Bar Ukva Bisheklium Naso Biyot. Let's see if we can figure this out. What we have here is a question of Tuma Vitara when a Kli, a vessel, is assumed to be tar, but it was left in a place where it's exposed to other people. And we don't know if these other people are Tmeim, and they might be Mitami the Kli, or not. And we're going to answer this question based on a principle called Kli Naso Biyad. Now, what Kli Naso Biyado is going to prove is that this individual designated his Tvua for sale on the open market. Because, as we'll see on Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis, if he was not interested in selling it, then why is he bringing his kliyumnis? The kliyumnis are there to clinch the mechira, the sale. And if there's a sale, then we have to be afraid of the fact that the people who are coming around to look at the object, at this kli, and they look at it this way and that way, try to evaluate it, is it worth the money they're asking? They might be tmeim, and they therefore will transmit tumah to the kli, even though the kli had a cheskes tara. And here we turn to Daf Chaf Daled Amud Beis.